Hey everybody, welcome to Cut, Transform, Glue. So this week I decided to put some work on the Guardian project, which I bet you guys thought I had abandoned. The idea for this project came from this weird shape that was perfect for a golf club, but as there are no golf courses near me, I decided to use it to make a cool robot instead. In the first episode I made the socket for the head as well as for the waist. I put some work on the joints and attachment points and I applied the first coat of primer, and this is where we left it. But my goal for this week is to make the arms and if I have the time to also work on the legs. Now to make the limbs for my models I have these very useful acrylic shapes. You probably already saw that being used on my past projects. I cut these on a public makerspace as I don't own a laser cutter yet, and I include in my design some extra lines so I can easily break them to the size I need to make things easier for me. As I just said, these are some acrylic shapes, so the best way to glue these pieces together is to use a type of glue that is specific for acrylic. I'm combining a couple of the acrylic shapes, of course, to reach some thickness for the arm segment, and I broke that last piece just to keep things interesting. Next, I rounded the corners using a Dremel and a rounding bit, which is very useful to have. Acrylic is a little tougher than most materials, so this can take a while and it is definitely a messy process. After some adjustments with a sanding stick, this was the result. The rounded corners look go very well with the shapes I chose for this project. Whenever I get the chance, I print some structural gusset pieces in bulk, so I chose one of these shapes and glued it right there in that corner, adding some detailing on the inside of the upper arm. Next, naturally came the forearm. I began by creating a pivot point on the upper arm. I chose a couple of round shapes and decided to glue them actually on the inside of the arm. To create a reliable axle, I decided to use a tiny steel rod that I probably saved from an electronic device I took apart. Usually I'd go for an M4 bolt and nut, but that would make things a lot harder, so yeah, I went for the simplest solution. On the forearm, instead of going again with the laser cut acrylic, I actually went with gribblies. Keeping the flat rectangular segments with rounded corners would be more predictable and actually easier, but I always love to add some weirdness to my models and make some unexpected turns. So as you just saw, I chose some interesting shapes and began combining them, using CA glue and, as you can see, a lot of baking soda. Some of these pieces were made to precisely match what I had, but some are repurposed gribbles that I made in the past. This great shape right here I saved from the insides of a dead printer, and it is a very interesting one. There's a rubber cover that I removed, revealing some great details underneath. It was a bit bigger than what I needed, so I decided to trim a portion of it, using this, which is now my favorite Dremel bit to cut plastic. I'll put a link to it on the description box. Okay, so right here I'll admit that I kinda got ahead of myself and went looking for some tiny detail pieces, which is usually the last step of a project, but that's because I wanted to add this to the resin piece right there. The first time you saw this one was on the Gribbly Hunter project, right there on the legs. Let me know in the comments if you remember this little guy. And yeah, grabbing these tiny bits, not the easiest thing, but anyways. That extra shape would be sitting on the outside of the upper arm, adding some bulkiness to it. I kinda thought of it as some booster pack that could be ordered with the robot, and I'm even planning on painting it with a different color than the arm itself, but we'll see. I of course then made the second arm, and I feel the size of it is perfect, but to be sure I went and applied a nice coat of primer. After the primer, it was clear that the arms needed to look a bit more robust, which I can work on later, but I want to hear your thoughts on this. The next thing I tackled was, of course, the legs, beginning with some work on the waist. To extend the waist a bit further down, creating some surface for the leg pivot points, I went with some very old and fake Lego pieces. I assembled them using CA glue to keep everything together and glue the thing on the bottom of the spherical waist piece. Then I decided to put a thick steel rod going across all of that to reinforce the axle for the legs. It was finally time to work on the leg segments, and I decided to figure out the shape of them by making some drawings first. To make the leg segments, I'll stack some 5mm acrylic that I previously cut on a big circular saw. Again, right here I'm using a glue that is specific for acrylic sheets, like a well-done type of glue. Then I grabbed a compact handsaw and cut the stacked acrylic to the size I needed. I then marked the rounded corners and angles and tried using my mini disc sander to shape the piece. I quickly realized it was going to take a lot of time, so I decided to take a shortcut. With most of the work done with a jigsaw, I then just made the final adjustments on the disc sander. I then carefully measured the piece and designed some precisely matching panels to add some detailing and bulk up the leg segment. I made a model for the outside and a different one for the inside of the leg and glued them with some CA glue this time. Then again, I combined some Gribbly's 3D printed parts and acrylic shapes to create a knee. I wanted this joint to look like it could move to different directions, so this is why I'm using some round pieces instead of going with a simple pivot point. Again, there was a ton of sanding and retouching on the pieces to make sure that I attached everything as aligned as possible. And I did the same processes to the bottom leg segment, stacked acrylic strips with rounded corners and custom parts for the pivot points. I'm not planning on putting this Guardian robot on a cool pose. I have this specific idea for its diorama that I'll explain on a later video, but I still want to keep the leg segments separated for the painting process. So this is why I'm still going with all of those axles for the legs and arms. Right here on the knee, for instance, I'm using some Lego pieces to later attach the kneecaps. I then applied a coat of primer on all pieces and checked the result. Of course, I'm still missing the hands, ankles, and feet, but the Guardian is already looking alive. As always, thanks for watching.